today we have the pleasure of having Jono with us. Jono is behind the scenes for Pink Mountains and Bent Art. Before we start the chat, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do in the community?
Sure. So Pink Mountains effectively is an umbrella or a hub for bringing a number of different groups together. We're auspiced through another organisation. So we don't actually have a formal structure as such, but one of the main things we do is run Pink Mountains Youth, a youth group for LGBTQI plus young people 13 years and above, so effectively high school. And this year we organised a Mardi Gras float in the parade, and we have organised political talks with people who are up for election to address the issues that are important to the LGBTQI community of the Blue Mountains. We run a social media platform with Facebook and share things that are relevant to the community, whether that be a visual for the Orlando shooting, which was 4 years ago now, or have a picnic, a community picnic sometimes in the summertime. We promote other events that are happening throughout the mountains that are relevant to the community. As well as a little bit of stuff that's happening around the world that impacts. So stuff around legislation, marriage equality, things that might be happening for other LGBTQI communities around the world and how that connects to the people of the Blue Mountains. So that's Pink Mountains, kind of in a nutshell. And then Bent Art was a project that came out of Pink Mountains originally. And is its own organisation now with a formal structure and constitution, so it's incorporated. And it's been going for 15 years. This would have been our 16th exhibition this year. So it is a visual arts exhibition annually for LGBTQI visual artists to be able to exhibit the amazing talents that we have, not only in the mountains, but further communities as well. And for that, I've been involved for about 5 or 6 years, I think it is. Kind of lost track of time. We've also done some, we had a trivia event, and sometimes we've run workshops for artists to increase their skills or to learn new skills or to dabble in another medium that they don't necessarily normally dabble in. And we contribute to the cultural landscape of the Blue Mountains with a specific focus. We also, Bent Art, the exhibition, is part of what was umbrellaed by Pink Mountains for a while as Pink Fest, which is the June long weekend. So Bent Art would kick off on the Friday night with the exhibition opening, and then the exhibition runs through to the Monday. And then on the Saturday, there's usually a bushwalk from Bush Lemons, and then there's the disco at Blackheath, run by the Three Sisters Social Group. And then on the Sunday, there's a few people with sore heads, but there's the big ball, which is also run by the Three Sisters, which the last few years has been at the Fairmont Resort. And the ball is a really amazing thing in that it's been running for more than 45 years. It started off in sort of large private houses of people in the mountains, and it then kind of went a bit more public for a while when it was at the Springwood Civic Centre, which is where the Springwood Community Hub and Theatre is now, except it was never booked under Three Sisters Social Group or as the Big Gay Ball. It was booked under the Blue Mountains Camellia Society, so that councillors didn't actually really get wind of what it really was that was happening in that hall, so that there was no controversy for many years. But being Mountains born and bred, and being involved in theatre, I was involved with Blue Mountains Musical Society for many years, and we always had to be bumped out from our show on the Saturday night, even if that meant 3 o'clock in the morning, because the ball was bumping in the following morning for the Sunday of the June long weekend. And of course, we all knew exactly what it was that was happening on that night. So there were a few people that crossed over communities.
I bet.
Yeah, just a bit. So, yes. From leading man to leading lady.
So that's an incredible and rich history. Do you think that the Blue Mountains, the wider community, have this understanding of the LGBTQIA plus community?
No, I think because the community, there's a lot of people who've been here for a long time. So I'm just letting the dog out. There's a lot of people who've been here for a long time, but there's, and so they will know it. But then there's others who are new, and particularly, I'm going to say around 40 plus, there starts to be a drift of people, particularly from Sydney to the mountains. And in some cases, it's people who grew up in the mountains who are then returning, and that's not uncommon, regardless of sexuality or gender. So it's kind of a history that people have to learn as they will come to understand as they connect with people, individuals, but also forge new traditions and new culture and new interests and new groups. So as with a lot of things within the LGBTQI community, there's not a huge amount of documentation necessarily. It's almost an oral history, kind of in the same way that, and I don't know whether you know this, but the AIDS Memorial Park at Medlow Bath. Medlow Park is where more than 130 trees have been planted in memory of those from the mountains that have passed from HIV/AIDS over the years. And that's another, and finally, it's only happened in the last few years. There's now an actual plaque that recognises that at the entrance to that park. Whereas the history of the park, there was a lot of opposition to the park initially, to the point where plants were being broken with baseball bats overnight and plaques being smashed, and because there were little plaques at the bottom of each tree. And for a while there was a section that became a bit overgrown, and there were a number of plaques that were kind of lost. So who are the keepers of this information? That's a mixture of people. There's no sort of central deposit for that information, but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to probably capture all of it in detail and accuracy and publish that. So, that might be something for the Pink Mountains website in the future as an example of somewhere for that information to live.
Amazing. What would you like the wider community to know about the LGBTQIA plus community in the Blue Mountains?
I think probably with the fact that the community's always been there. We haven't necessarily been donning a feather boa and tossing glitter in the air walking down the street. We've been people's neighbours, we've been in the street, we've just been, someone that you've passed in the supermarket for decades, where it's not like there's a whole heap of people from Sydney that have suddenly moved to the mountains, and are taking over. As I said, I'm mountains born and bred. I'm from here, I grew up here. it's where I discovered who I was here. Yeah, and there's a lot of those. So there's also that tradition, again, regardless of gender or sexuality, where people, finish school and pretty quickly head to the big smoke, to run away or go to uni or get a job or, discover something else, and then they drift back to the mountains. Yeah, so I think probably the fact that the community has always been here and always will be here. Growing up as a kid, we had next door neighbours, two guys who became our next door neighbours for a little while. At that point, I was too young and naive. I didn't put it together. I just knew that there were two guys that lived next door. Yeah, so I'm sure lots of people have got those stories.
Yeah.
They're just part of the fabric.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So
sometimes the spread's very ugly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fabulous.
So with all of this history and being engaged in this community for as long as you have been, what has been one of your memorable moments that has, really just taken you by surprise or has really touched you?
I think probably, this is a number of years ago when the marriage equality campaign was sort of still in its infancy, and Pink Mountains had a stall at the Magpie Markets at Lawson 1 month or for a couple of months. And yeah, marriage equality was starting to become a bit of a hot topic, and there was a petition or something like that. And this grumpy woman came up and said, "Oh, what are you all about?" And it was like, "Oh, okay, this isn't going to go well." And, "Oh, well, we're here about marriage equality and, and allowing same-sex marriage and blah." And she said, "Oh, I don't know why you'd want to get married, but I don't know why you can't. Where do I sign?"
That is so gorgeous.
It was like, oh, okay, here's an ally that I just kind of wasn't expecting at all. Yes, it's great. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah, I suppose that's been, that kind of attitude has been a nice surprise. I think probably watching some of the evolution take place within schools, although there's a long way to go there still, but changing attitudes both in public and private schools. Probably a little bit of reverse going on in some of the Catholic schools, but that's probably an external influence rather than a real commitment from those community leaders within those schools. Probably not exactly what they think, but their hands are forced. Yeah, so it's nice to see some change there. Certainly when I was at school, I suspected there was a guy in a year above me who was gay, but I wasn't sure, and he certainly wasn't going to give me any confirmation of that. He was far too closeted himself and dealing with stuff himself. Yeah, which I get. That's fair enough, and everyone's got their own journey. But I think now I think that's changed quite a lot, and people are able to be a bit more out. Whereas I did feel a little bit like I was the only gay in the village at school. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So with all of the things that you do, you've got a firm grip on the gaps in this community and what's needed. What are some ways that community can support LGBTQIA+ in the Blue Mountains?
I suppose being an ally, but also, as an example, seeing, possibly knowing of a young person that might be struggling with their sexuality or has come out, but is struggling to find a network or community of others that they can connect with, and seeing something like a poster or a post on social media, or a story in the newspaper about something like Pink Mountains Youth, and letting them know, passing that information on, and being proactive, I think, in probably making the community more cohesive and connected. It's really fascinating, given the fact we are, a world with the internet and things accessible so easily, and yet I think people are probably more disconnected in many ways than they have been in the past. There's the past where really before the internet and mobile phones and mobile apps and all that kind of stuff, you had to go to the dances and you had to go to the social gatherings and the dinners to connect to people within your community. And you would find out about things that were happening kind of word of mouth, very much word of mouth, very grassroots. If you moved to the area, you might connect with someone and who then might take you under their wing and introduce you to others and that kind of thing. And I don't know that that's happening as much, because the assumption is, oh, well, it's all online. Everyone will find out everything that they need to know. And often people don't know what to be looking for. So that's a bit of a challenge. That, and online is not as private as you necessarily think. So even on Facebook, you may want to connect with the Pink Mountains community through the Facebook group or the Facebook page, but that information that you like that or you're part of that group is then made public on your profile. So if you're kind of still flying under the radar a little bit, you may not want everyone that you're connected with on Facebook to know everything about your life, you may not join those groups or pages because it publishes and says this is something about this person, if that makes sense. So whereas picking up the old days of picking up a newspaper from the news agency, a copy of Star Observer, or even picking up a copy from the local sex shop, was discreet and no one was judging you, and you were able to do that. And the fact that there aren't, as far as I know, any sex stores, adult stores left in the mountains, that channel for communication has gone. Even the old notice board that used to be up, where people were wanting to connect with one another, has kind of been taken over by Grindr or any of the other dating apps. But there was that sense of belonging or other people around that's kind of shifted, I think. So go back to your question, because there was something else I wanted to say.
No, that was truly beautiful. I think
No, I've got something else to say. What was the other question? What was the question again?
So how can the wider community support LGBTQIA plus?
Yes. So that's the wider community. If I can narrow that in, the LGBTQI community within the mountains still has a long way to go in regards to supporting itself and not discriminating against itself. And so this is why I wanted to go back on the question, because there is still, and it's left over from old attitudes, particularly attitudes that I witnessed during the 90s, where there were very much men's groups and women's groups, and there are women hating men and men hating women, and inappropriate things said still that are negative and homophobic towards one another, particularly between gays and lesbians, but then also, you know, the fact that there is biphobia, there is transphobia within the community, there's a lot of racism within the community, a lot of derogatory terms that are used that are not, that the attitudes need to stop so that we have a lot more cohesion within the community. We are a minority group, and we don't need to marginalise others, people within that minority. Even though of course, there's minorities within minorities, but we don't need to make life difficult for those minorities. I think the other thing that the community can do is stop relying on others to make things happen. And I think this is a really important one. And what I've witnessed, and I see it particularly with Bent Art. Bent Art, I'm the only guy on the committee. And there have been very few guys on the committee in the past. It's the women that have made it happen. And I commend them. And I mean, to the point where it's almost a joke of, oh, well, if you want something to happen, you need to get the lesbians on board, because if not, it won't ever happen. Yes. So yeah. I think probably opportunity for some of the groups possibly to merge, to particularly from a management committee point of view, and getting people to work together more, because there are many common goals or common interests with maybe some subgroups to do specific activities. Because people do find challenge in committing to things and having the time to do things. And then you do hear, oh, well, why didn't that happen? Or I wish that would happen. And it's like, well, you need to put your hand up and you need to make it happen. So, yeah.
No, very powerful message. And I think that there's definitely power in numbers, and having diverse people working together, because that's how you can create magic. So, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a true pleasure. Now, is there places that we can go to follow and find out more information from you?
Yep, sure. So the Pink Mountains website, which always needs updating, but pinkmountains.com.au. There's Bent Art, the Bent Art website, which people can go to. Bentart. Oh, I think it's changed to org now. It was .com. One moment, please, caller. I should know that off the top of my head, but when you just get so used to it, .com.au still. Yes. And then there's the Three Sisters social group page. But if you go to the Pink Mountains website, there's links then off to different groups like Bush Lemons or Stitch and Bitch or Three Sisters or Bent Art, info about Pink Mountains Youth, that kind of thing. There's the Pink Mountains Facebook page and there's the Pink Mountains Facebook group. So there's two different things. And there's the Bent Art Facebook page and Instagram as well. Yes, so obviously with COVID-19, it's been a bit weird and a lot of things not happening. Everything's kind of in a bit of hiatus. But hopefully things will improve and community will be able to get back together and do things. So, I think bushwalking's allowed now. So, you might see Bush Lemons back out there again in walking through the national park, and we'll see stuff starting to happen for Bent Art 2021, and hopefully Pink Mountains Youth will be able to meet in person again, not just online. Because I'm not quite sure what Stitch and Bitch are doing or some of the other groups yet, but head to pinkmountains.com.au and find out.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. If this is something that you'd like to see more of, please follow, share, like, and subscribe. Thanks.